characters that I wrote into the book. It'll take a minute or two. It'll entice you. Colonel Tristan Ashlock was not a lunatic by any means. Now, he's the guy who was plotting to blow up Mecca. He was not criminally insane or pathological in his views of the world. He was an ardent American patriot who had spent his entire adult life wearing the uniform of the United States Army. Every male member of his family on his mother's side had worn that same uniform, dating back 5 generations to the Civil War, all of them graduating from the Virginia Military Institute near the top of their classes. Not one of his line had ever graduated, at the very top, however, until Tristan did so in 1977. His great-great-grandfather, William J. Smith, had been on the verge of doing so when the Commonwealth of Virginia voted to secede from the Union in the spring of 1861. But this was as close as anyone else with his blood had ever come to matching the achievement. Upon leaving VMI to fight for the Confederacy, the young lieutenant, William Bill Smith, had served briefly under General Bernard E. Bee before both were killed in action on the 21st of July at First Manassas. In death, Bill Smith left behind a pair of infant twin daughters, Eleanor and Sarah. It was from Sarah's line that Tristan Quentin Ashlock would emerge 4 generations later as the youngest of 4 sons, his older brothers all destined to give their lives either in the jungles of Vietnam or in clandestine military operations carried out during the Cold War. Their deaths, along with Tristan's genetic infertility, had assured that he would be the last of Sarah's line. Such were the laws of primogeniture. Today, Colonel Ashlock was 57 years old, with thick gray hair that he still wore closely cropped to his head. His penetrating eyes were the color of steel dust, and though his facial features had begun to sag a bit, he maintained the distinguished chiseled visage of the handsome warrior he had once been. He was a veteran of both Gulf Wars, the ongoing debacle in Afghanistan, and the recipient of the DSC, the Distinguished Service Cross. Though his service career had been well distinguished as a commander of troops in the field, he had made some socially critical errors during his climb up the chain of command, errors in the form of failing to keep his mouth shut at the appropriate times and failing to kiss the butts of the appropriate generals when it would have been prudent to do so, thus giving offense in all of the wrong military circles at all of the worst times. And I go on. Now remember who he is. He's a chief character in this plot in Countdown to Mecca. If you're a member of the military, or you know someone a member of the military, and you understand that all of my characters are drawn from real life, you'll understand that I had to use a novel in order to get my message out there. Do I have to spell it out for you any clearer? I'll be right back.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
My Savage Nation is sponsored by SwissAmerica.com. It's the only company I trust to protect my wealth. Call 800-BUY-COIN. So I'm giving out free copies of my forthcoming novel, Countdown to Mecca, to everyone who gets on the show today. But I want to read one more paragraph from the novel, and it's about Tristan, the general, who's plotting to blow up Mecca. And here's why. I'm trying to lay out the groundwork. The upper echelons of the United States military, from the president down through the entire general staff, had forgotten their collective duty. They had grown soft and indecisive in their misguided desire for peace at any cost, satisfied to let the tide of Islam slowly envelop the world. How many Middle Eastern governments would have to fall to Muslim extremists before America's leaders woke up and realized the folly of their so-called peaceful ambitions? And now it looked as though Syria would be the next. General Ashlock believed that something bold and decisive had to be done to cauterize the growing malignancy of Islam. And since no one in the upper echelons of any Western government possessed the resolve to take this action, it appeared that he would have to do it for them. Do you understand what I'm doing here? Do you know why I wrote the novel? Because it's not only 1 minute to midnight, it's 10 seconds to midnight, which is why I wrote Countdown to Mecca.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage. And now, America's most exciting radio talk show, The Savage Nation, home of unprotected talk, borders, language, culture. And here he is, Michael Savage.
I am going to still go to Kenya. Look, it's a heartbreaking situation. There's a lot of tumult and chaos around the world right now. And part of our goal as the world's leading superpower is to work with partner countries to try to resolve conflicts, to be ruthless in going after terrorism. But we're not going to do that by ourselves, and we're not going to do it just by deploying more Marines in every country that has these problems.
If we had this man in office in 1939, you would be speaking German or you would be a lampshade. Welcome to the Savage Nation. Everything the man says is a lie and a cover-up. Now, I don't want to turn the whole show into Obama bashing because it's too easy to do. And we are at 1 minute to midnight, or is it 1 second to midnight, with the penetration and the infiltration that we all could see plainly in front of our eyes. Speaking to the issue of the blitzkrieg that ISIS is conducting, almost uninterrupted by Obama, there's a great article entitled Waging JV War by Michael Fumento in today's New York Post, and it's worth reading. You see, he fought there, and here's what he wrote. As Iraqis fight to repel ISIS in Ramadi, the O administration is deeming this vital city expendable. In so doing, the White House shows it understands nothing about the value of Ramadi or even its own capacity to defend it. There's no better example of U.S. incompetence in dealing with these mad jihadis. Why isn't this key western Iraqi city, the capital of Anbar province, high on our priority list? According to Joint Chiefs of Staff Martin Dempsey, it's because President O would rather place the emphasis on defending an Anbar refinery to protect the oil supplies, as if we couldn't do both and then some. For the past 8 months, the administration has settled for little more than jabs when it could have landed flurries of punishing roundhouse blows. According to the latest 24-hour Defense Department report, U.S. forces launched just 36 airstrikes against ISIS in both Iraq and Syria. That's actually much more than normal, but it nevertheless is the equivalent of fighter bombers from the offshore U.S. carrier making just one sortie a day, though each of these planes can fly several daily. And that doesn't count the vast numbers of ground-based F-16s, F-15s, F-22s, A-10s, B-1 heavy bombers, helicopters, and Reaper and Predator drones we have in the area, or the aircraft of 11 other coalition nations. The day before, there were only 13 airstrikes. Fewer than a single Reaper can launch on one mission. Cruise missiles are also in theater. Plus, B-52 and B-2 bombers can strike from anywhere in the world. Yet, with this massive armada and assets on the ground to help identify targets, the administration seems unable to strike more than a handful of targets a day. A machine gun here, a truck there. There's been little effort to translate success in pinpoint assassination efforts, such as that which last month may have temporarily knocked ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi out of the fight into a war-fighting effort. Which brings us back to Ramadi, a city that's no big deal, says Dempsey. Quote, it has no symbolic meaning. That's an incredible statement, he writes. The city's meaning is both symbolic and strategic. During the Second Iraq War, al-Qaeda in Iraq chose the city as its headquarters, and it became the most fiercely contested area in the country. That's why the author spent 2 of his 3 Iraq embeds there. It's why SEAL Team 3 of American Sniper fame was stationed there during my embeds and yet again later. That includes the first SEAL killed in Iraq, Michael Mansour, who won the Medal of Honor for diving on a grenade. Many experts consider the Battle of Ramadi and the Anbar awakening engineered by Captain Travis Patrick Quinn the actual turning point of the war. Patrick Quinn, who was killed in Ramadi along with my Marine Public Affairs handler, got the Sunni chieftains to join the Americans and Iraqi security forces to defeat al-Qaeda. Now those same chieftains and their brave men are being left to their own devices. Dempsey says that when we get around to it, we'll just take Ramadi back. Sure, like Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit was retaken, 1 bloody meter at a time, as each trash bag, dirt mound, and corner hit an IED, and after untold numbers of the defenders were horribly murdered. In Ramadi, anybody who fought alongside us is slated for torture and death. Humanity aside, what kind of a signal are we sending potential allies? And he goes on. And he says this, that's why only about 1/3 of Americans support his actions regarding ISIS, the lowest figure yet. And 65% of Americans think the war against ISIS is going badly. Michael Fumento concludes, he's a veteran paratrooper, by the way, who fought twice in Ramadi, once in Fallujah and once in Afghanistan. He wasn't playing golf, and here's what he says. With monsters whose tactics would have made the German SS Blanche, who have aroused the ire of the Pope and even other terrorist groups, Obama is keeping America's arms tied behind its back. We're no sleeping giant. We're downright comatose. I would like to say thank you to Michael Fumento, but I don't think you have it completely right. We're not comatose. We have a president who's working for the other team. That's my opinion. It doesn't mean he's an active member of ISIS. It doesn't matter what the reason is. He may as well be a member of ISIS. It's as simple as that. 855-400-7282. We are at 1 second to midnight. 1 minute to midnight is too far out. We're 1 second from midnight. According to the FBI, there are sleeper cells in 49 states. It's why I wrote Countdown to Mecca, a novel that will be out in a few short weeks. It will be my last commercial novel in this series. And the reason I wrote it as fiction is because there are things I had to say that I could not say in nonfiction. And that's why I created characters. And that's why I made it fiction. And everyone who gets on the show today gets a free copy of Countdown to Mecca. Now let's take some calls. KSFO in San Francisco. Joe, welcome to the program. Go ahead, please.
Thanks for taking my call. I'm just wondering if, rather than, the Manchurian Candidate thing, which I'm having a hard time buying into, if there's like a strategic maneuver going on here with the U.S. government and the inaction against ISIS, in that perhaps they want to let ISIS go ahead and form a nation state, if you will, the caliphate they were talking about. And there could be a couple of reasons why the government would like that to happen.
No, what would be the reason? Why would you want Hitler to have a larger territory? I mean, would you let Hitler wants to increase his land because he needs living space, so you let him invade Czechoslovakia and Poland?
Well, one thing that I can think of is that any military, not just the U.S. military, but any military seems to have a difficult time defeating sort of loosely organized militias, guerrillas. What the U.S. military in particular is really, really good at is combating a complete army with a homeland state. And
well, they already have a homeland state. They defined it. It's called ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. They've defined their homeland.
Right, but right.
So you don't let them. Do you let them get stronger, or do you attack them while they're weaker?
Well, this is just a theory, but thank you for that, because that leads to the second point, is that the caliphate right now actually straddles a couple of borders, right? There's a portion of it is in Iraq and a portion of it is in Syria. And, it seems like there's a reluctance by the U.S. government from a political standpoint, not military, political standpoint, to make any incursions into other quote-unquote sovereign territories like Iraq, especially Syria, where, there's a civil war raging and the Russians are involved.
Oh, well, hold it, sir. We are already in Syria. Special forces have been operating in Syria for several years now. They've been training the so-called opposition fighters, mainly Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who are trying to topple Assad. The U.S. is in Syria. Everybody knows that. Anybody in the military will tell you that. They have family members in Syria. Everybody knows this.
That hasn't turned the tide, though, has it? What would turn the tide is if there was a nation state that we could just roar an entire army into and basically take over like we've done before in Iraq, for instance.
You're actually arguing the reverse of military strategy, and which I'm not a military man, but it's common sense. Do you allow a vicious enemy to grab a larger swath of territory before you take them on, or do you take them on when they're weaker?
Well, you would think, right? I hear your argument. You would think. However, it doesn't matter kind of how big they get. And the U.S. military is so dominant, so awesome, that we could go in and take an entire country.
Well, why can't we